Many cultures, going all the way back to antiquity, have some idea of a god. For many, it was a way to explain the unexplainable, or to make them more comfortable with their surroundings, or to help them in battle. Many today deny the existence of a supernatural being, or instead believe the universe itself is a god. The interesting thing is that theories like the Big Bang or evolution end up leaving us with more questions than answers for everything. However, the true God Yahweh is actually much bigger than that. Something that is interesting to consider before we get started is the fact that the Bible starts off not with a proof or explanation of God, but rather it starts off with a declaration of God's works. Right off the bat, Scripture assumes we know God is real and who God is. God as the Creator is presented casually and naturally. But aside from that, I wanted to take a look at some extra biblical evidence for the existence of Yahweh. The Mesha Stele, the oldest discovered reference to the name of Yahweh as the God of Israel, is found on the Mesha Stele, otherwise known as the Moabite stone. This is dated to 840 BC. This inscription lines up very strongly with Scripture. So Mesha was the king of Moab, and he authored this inscription to commemorate some of his achievements, one of which being his account of a war fought with Israel about 10 years prior to this inscription. Israel's account is found in 2 Kings chapter 3. After King Ahab died, Mesha seized the opportunity to throw off the yoke of tribute imposed on his people by David. Mesha's account focuses primarily on his victory, while the biblical account focuses on Mesha's rebellion and the counterattacks of Israel. Mesha claimed to have stolen an Israelite shrine to Yahweh. This stele also references Omri, and on line 31 of the stele, though slightly damaged, the phrase House of David is arguably mentioned. It also mentions places like Nebo and Gad, but most importantly, this inscription makes direct mention of the name of Yahweh and confirms that He is the God of Israel. The Soleb inscription. Another early mention of the existence of Yahweh comes from the town of Soleb, which is dated to around 1400 BC, during the reign of Amenhotep III. While the Egyptians may have been known to exaggerate their conquests, they never decorated temples with fictional adversaries. So, the temple at Soleb has a cartouche on one of the pillars that is damaged but legible. It matches other pillars, and this cartouche was accompanied by the image of a kneeling slave. The inscription that we can still read says, "The land of the Shasu of Yahweh." The temple is adorned with many cartouches of other Shasu, and this term Shasu means nomad or wandering people. So in this case, these people were known as the wandering people of Yahweh. The discovery of this cartouche proves that Egypt had become well acquainted with the name of Yahweh by this time. And this is just one of the discoveries that lends to the fact that the Exodus occurred around 1446 BC, during the reign of Amenhotep II, a time that 1 Kings 6:1 also corroborates. Another corroboration would be Jephthah's message to the Amorite king in Judges 11:26, stating Israel had lived in Canaan for 300 years, and this message is dated around 1100 BC. However, some may argue that Ramesses II was the Exodus pharaoh because Exodus 1:11 mentions the store city of Ramses, confusing it with the later capital city Pi Ramesses. It is important to note that the phrase "born of Ra" had a few variations and was in circulation long before Ramesses II. The prince Ramos being one example. Additionally, between the paws of the Great Sphinx, it was discovered that the inscriptions there include a corroboration to Exodus 12:29. The firstborn heir to the throne after Amenhotep II mysteriously died, allowing for Thutmose IV to take his place. Another interesting fact is that Amenhotep III's successor and son, Akhenaten, mysteriously changed the national religion of Egypt to monotheism, perhaps inspired by what had taken place, proving the existence of one true God. However, it is important to note that the anonymity of the Exodus pharaoh may be deliberate, serving as a judgment due to the fact that pharaohs craved being remembered. The Kuntilit Ajrud inscriptions. Within Israelite context, the earliest discovered mention of the name of Yahweh was found numerous times in the inscriptions of Kuntelet Ajrud. This was a collection of inscribed stones, jars, and art dating to the 8th and 9th century BC. These contained many phrases like, "May you be blessed by Yahweh." Some of the inscriptions even include Yahweh alongside other pagan gods. This lines up, though, with the syncretism that became rampant throughout Judah and Israel, as we see in 1 Kings chapter 12. This site also contained abbreviations for the name of Yahweh, other than the Tetragrammaton YHWH. These abbreviations were either YHW or Yahu in Judah, and YW or Yo in Israel. Small variations of Hebrew. These abbreviations for Yahweh, paired with the people of Israel, have been found elsewhere in the ancient world, such as Egypt. So we can see that the name of Yahweh has been present in inscriptions for thousands of years, and not just in friendly contexts, which is a good thing. This confirms that Yahweh's status of being God has remained consistent in history and across cultures. However, the fact that Edomites, Midianites, and Canaanites made reference to and acknowledged Yahweh has led to false claims and modern myths that Yahweh originated among those pagan pantheons. Their arguments for this claim lack substantial evidence. One other thing to note is how Yahweh is a complex being. He is difficult to understand with our human minds, and he operates differently than any other false god in the other religions of the world. Every other god in other religions have an origin story, they're not perfect, and they can be perfectly explained in their lore. The triune Elohim Yahweh exists outside of space and time, has no explained origin, is perfect and holy, gracious and merciful, and he wants a relationship with us, unlike that of the gods of other religions. Additionally, there have been a number of philosophical arguments for God throughout history. There is the argument that the laws of logic or morality would not exist without God. The physical and chemical laws of nature are orderly and logical because they were created by an orderly and logical God. There are moral, logical, and cosmological arguments that can be made, such as the famous 5 Ways by Thomas Aquinas. Other notable presenters of cosmological arguments for God's existence include G.W. Leibniz and Samuel Clarke. More recent figures include Richard Swinburne, the author of both editions of The Existence of God, and William Lane Craig, who wrote Does God Exist? And a famous example of the moral argument was presented by C.S. Lewis in his book Mere Christianity. The complexity of life, the fine-tuning of the universe, DNA, and the human brain attest that there are mysteries at work beyond our understanding. I have seen secular reports that say quantum physics points to a non-physical spiritual realm, that photons behave one way when they are being observed and a different way when they are not, as if somehow they are aware. Charles Darwin, in his book, The Origin of Species, admitted that the complexity of even just the human eye makes the theory of evolutionary natural selection absurd. He admits his theories are hard to believe, yet he chooses to believe them anyway, choosing to think this all formed by coincidence and happenstance. But laws require a lawgiver. Design requires a designer. To say all of the laws and design of nature came about by accident is just as great of a leap of faith than it is to believe it was created by a supernatural being. And this doesn't even include the hundreds of fulfilled prophecies, as well as an unfathomable amount of answered prayers and miracles. But, as 1 Thessalonians 5:21 says, test all things and hold fast to what is good. So the moral argument posits that there can be no objective morality without the existence of God. Atheists have even conceded to this fact, such as professor and atheist Joel Marks in his Amoral Manifesto. There is also the spiritual experience argument, which states that when one has an unexplainable and supernatural experience or a miracle, then the reason behind it would be the existence of God rather than coincidence or illusion. And so I've had plenty of personal experiences and moments that are undeniably God, and I would be a fool to attribute those moments to coincidence or hallucinations. However, skeptics can easily hand-wave this argument away, despite not having an answer behind those experiences people have with God. Funnily enough, skeptics don't put in as much effort to hand-wave away the reports of Satanism or witchcraft, communicating with or summoning spiritual beings, Plenty of testimonies and eyewitness accounts prove that there are indeed manifestations of spiritual darkness. Stories of ghosts and Ouija boards are easily accepted, but one could argue that the existence of such entities proves the supernatural realm exists, and therefore gives room for the existence of God. There is also the argument in favor of the accuracy of Scripture, the fulfillment of prophecies, and the intervention of God throughout history, including the life and resurrection of Christ. We will dive a bit more into these later. Encountering facts and accepting them are very different things. And for a determined, unwavering skeptic, their presuppositions will try to outweigh the facts. But at the end of the day, belief in the existence of God takes a measure of faith.